Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Tuesday, September the 26th, 2023. Well, we're going to begin talking about a new life key. It's life key number 6 in the book, Life Keys. It's entitled, You Are Called to Serve, where you can harmonize with God's song in your hearts. I'm going to start off by talking about, years ago I went to one of my high school reunions, and early in the evening I was talking with one of my former classmates when this other fellow came up, other classmate, introduced himself, and he looked vaguely familiar to him. I couldn't quite place him, and when he said his name, it sounded familiar as well. And apparently he felt the same way about me, but he added that he too had trouble placing me. He said, "Were you in the band?" He finally asked me. And before I had a chance to say anything in response, my friend, his name was Mark, laughed out loud and said, "The band? Don't you know who you're talking to? Ed was a jock, the captain of the football team. He used to play polkas in the locker room to get psyched up for the game." Well, now it was my turn to laugh out loud. I looked over at Mark in disbelief. I had almost forgotten that little detail, and I thought, how did he ever remember it? Because Mark had been a soccer player in high school. He'd never even been in the locker room before football games. But although I do remember that my teammates used to razz me about my rather unusual pregame ritual, but I never knew until this point that anybody else really knew about it as well. Well, anyway, for a few brief moments, I was transported back to those days, decades earlier. You see, in order to get mentally prepared to play, when I was a high school football player, I would listen to polkas every night of the week before the game. Being of Polish-German background, polka music is a big part of my heritage. But more than that, I discovered that the upbeat tempo got my blood flowing and the juices going, the energy rushing, the very things I needed to play well. And just as Mark recalled, I even used to bring a cassette tape of my favorite polkas to the locker room to listen to while I put on my uniform, although my teammates didn't necessarily appreciate it. I don't think too many of them liked polka music as much as I did. Looking back on it now, I understand completely what I was trying to do and why I needed that music to get me psyched up. Even though I was the captain of the team my senior year and I won some awards and recognition for my play on the football field, I was not a naturally great player. There were plenty of others, even on my own team, who were bigger, stronger, faster, even better athletes. And some were much more temperamentally suited to the game as well. They were much more aggressive, even had a little bit of a mean streak, while I was pretty mellow and laid back for the most part. But I had one thing that they didn't have. I loved the game. I had a passion for it. When I played other sports in high school, I played a couple years of basketball, also ran track and threw the shot put, but I never had anywhere near the same kind of success in those sports as I did in football. And that's because football was my passion. I liked those other sports, always tried my best, but football, if you will, was in my blood. And yet, because I was not a naturally great or gifted player, because I am not by nature overly aggressive or violent, I had to prepare myself mentally each and every week in order to play at a high level, the kind of level that I wanted to play at. And what I discovered was that by listening to this polka music, which again got my blood flowing, the juices going, my energy rushing, I could literally work myself into the kind of frenzy that allowed me to compensate for my lack of natural ability, and certainly my lack of a mean streak. And I was willing to go through just such a ritual, working myself to a fevered pitch before the game, because why? I was so passionate about football, and it worked. Passion. Webster's dictionary defines passion as a powerful emotion. Some of the other words used in the dictionary to describe passion are fervor, ardor, zeal, and enthusiasm. And interestingly enough, it's that word enthusiasm that I want to talk about, because it comes from the Greek phrase en theos, or with God. And it comes, we usually say, from the heart. In other words, if you are enthusiastically pursuing a passion that God has put in your heart, then you are doing it with God. Think of what can happen, ask the authors of Life Keys, when God places these motivations in your heart. Someone once wrote that certain something that makes us great, that pulls us out of the mediocre and commonplace, that builds into us power. It glows and shines. It lights up our faces. Enthusiasm. The keynote that makes us sing and makes others sing with us. Enthusiasm, the maker of friends, the maker of smiles, the producer of confidence. It cries to the world, I've got what it takes. Enthusiasm, the inspiration that makes us wake up and live. It puts spring in our steps, spring in our hearts, a twinkle in our eyes, gives us confidence in ourselves and in our fellow men. Enthusiasm, it changes a pessimist to an optimist, a loafer to a go-getter. Enthusiasm, if we have it, we should thank God for it. If we don't have it, then we should get down on our knees and pray for it. Well, now what we're talking about here are positive passions that lead to good works, not negative or forbidden passions. The authors of Life Keys would rather refer to those as deceptions or obsessions rather than passions. It doesn't take long to think of obsessed people with misdirected causes who brought pain to dozens, thousands, even millions of people, does it? Does it, they write in their book. In contrast, when we discover the passions that God has in mind for us, we can operate with enthusiasm, or again, with God. It's been said that enthusiasm is the greatest asset in the world. It beats money, power, and influence. And former Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird once called the Polaris submarine a priceless asset in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, the man responsible for the development of the Polaris was Rear Admiral William Rayburn. He carefully recruited the top management personnel, and when they came on the job, he would give them their families a patriotic pep talk on the importance of their assignments. And on those rare occasions when it appeared that someone wasn't doing his best, he would call them into his office and for what he termed rededication. One officer, recalling one of these emotional sessions, said, "When I walked out, I knew I was ready to die for someone. I didn't know whether it was for the admiral, the president, my mother, or the head of the Boy Scouts, but brother, I was ready to die if necessary." Now that's enthusiasm. Enthusiasm has been defined as energy that boils over and runs down the side of the pot. But having enthusiasm, and we're going to end here, one last thought, doesn't mean that we're going to be the best at something. I had enthusiasm for football as a high school player. It was enough to carry me to play small college football, but that was the extent of it. It went no further than that. I didn't have the ability to go any further than that. But we need enthusiasm at every level. Leonard Bernstein, the conductor, was once asked, "What's the hardest instrument to play?" And without any hesitation, he replied, "Second violin." "I can always get plenty of first violins," he said, "but to find one who plays second violin, which is with as much enthusiasm as the first violin, or second French horn or second flute, now that's a problem. And yet, if no one plays second, we have no harmony." So we all need enthusiasm, and I believe that God gives us those passions and those feelings of enthusiasm. We're going to continue that conversation tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Until then, take care. Have a great day.